Start your local recordings as well, please.
Locally recording.
Testing.
Bars and kilobytes.
Did you say that live, Johnny? Because that sounded like the recording.
Bars and kilobytes.
Yeah, you just
I
said
did
it,
say
didn't you?
that.
Hello, live people. This is the pre-show. Welcome. I don't see any reason why we don't just jump into this. I'll play
Hello,
the music.
alive people. I thought I heard you say hello, alive people. Do we have some dead ones?
I don't know
You
if we have
never
a
know
lot of
who's
ghosts.
listening.
You don't know if ghosts are listening because they don't show up in the stats.
That's
Depends on
true.
your take on the afterlife too.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into it, sure. On an episode about docs.
A
how
very
can we not?
special episode of Go Time.
Yeah.
Yes.
The ultimate doc, the Bible.
Hunters.
Yeah. Ghost time.
Oh,
We could do it.
Ooh.
Let's do it.
is there like a credit sequence we can roll?
Yeah, there is, and I'm about to roll it. If you stop having great ideas for 5 minutes. Here we go.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Well, hello there. Welcome to Go Time. I'm Matt Ryer, and today we're talking about docs. This episode is called This is Gonna Blow Your Docs Off. I'm joined by my co-host. It's Johnny Borsico. Hello, Johnny.
Happy to be back.
Happy to have you back. Do you do docs? Do you like docs?
Oh, I love docs. I'm
Wow,
all
we
about
get
the
to see
docs.
Johnny's pretty face. Nice.
Can you not see
Yes,
it?
here it is. Yeah.
I want
yeah.
to see you. Why
Take
don't
it
you
in.
Interact
Take it
with
in.
Johnny. I don't see him.
It's
Do
just
you?
you, Mark. It's here.
Yeah, I can see him.
Resize your window,
I-
man.
I just have a black box. For
Oh.
Johnny. Yeah.
I don't know. You know, a black
It
box.
says
hey, Johnny.
that Johnny's video will improve when his quality of internet improves. Apparently, I don't know.
Wow.
Oh,
I'm
I see the
hardwired. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never mind. I have to make do
Okay.
with the soothing tones of your voice.
Yes.
Well,
they
we'll
can
send
be.
you a photo. Send you a photo of Johnny. So you can...
I'll frame it for you. You can hang it on your wall.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Well, that voice you heard not respecting the format is none other than Mark Bates. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the show. Now you can speak.
Hello. Now I can speak.
It's great to have you back.
Would I ever respect the format of the show?
Yeah.
Really?
I know, exactly. I don't know what I was expecting, really.
Hmm.
On the other hand, very professional Corey. Not made a peep yet, because he's not yet been introduced. It's Cory LaNou's with us. Hello, Corey.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to Go Time. Excited to talk about docs. It's docs, isn't it? This is like one of those things that we have to live with as engineers, and sometimes feels like a very big chore. Writing docs.
Well, I don't think
yeah.
anybody likes going to the doctors. I mean, it can be unpleasant. Did I get the
Especially
wrong
with
show?
that glove on.
Hang on. Sorry, wrong show.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
No, you got the right ones. Mark's going to be talking about the doctors. We'll be talking about
We talked about
writing
all my
things
medical issues as a middle-aged
Mhm.
man.
It's just an hour show. We don't
Fair enough.
have enough time. Yeah.
Johnny.
Oh, can you see him now?
Here's
yeah,
Johnny.
He's a little fuzzy, but he's there.
I wonder what's going on. Something up.
Yeah, I am a little fuzzier these days.
Yeah, but you're not low
Aren't we
res,
all?
are you? It's like Johnny. It's like you're feeling unwell, and how that manifests is you go low res. Like that's how you can tell that I've got a bit of a cold. I'm a bit low res, and then you have to recover
All pixelated.
a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But you two live nearest each other on the planet, so I would expect you to have good
I mean, we
connection.
live on the same coast of the same country.
Yeah, well,
Right.
there you go.
Right.
I don't know if that makes us not we're in the same time zone.
Yeah, well, it's closer.
We
than
used to
you are
live
me.
super close. We used to live
Right.
very close. But yeah,
Right.
matter of fact, I mean, I don't know. Corey's in Wisconsin. I don't know which of us is actually the closest to each other. It's probably
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, because I'm an hour flight from you.
Yeah, Corey's in the middle of nowhere.
I'm an hour from the airport.
You're in a what?
I'm an hour from the airport.
And that airport then
Our
takes
flight.
you to another airport where you can get a ride to go somewhere else.
Correct.
I've been
That's
there. I've been there when the airport wasn't open yet.
What were you doing there,
Hilton's
Mark?
pay for the one
I
flight.
was there too early for my flight. The airport wasn't open.
Oh, I thought you meant like they'd not even built it yet, finished building it, and you're there trying to get a flight.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't operating hours.
It wasn't
Right.
operating hours. Yeah, all they had big metal gates down over all like the two gates that they had. The two scanning rows, the gates are down there. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, in fairness,
wow.
it's 2 gates, but it's the same gate with just 2 different numbers.
It's not even 2 gates.
1/2 over one door.
I like the sound of that. Be like always going first class. You get your whole own experience. Be quite nice.
It was pretty cool. It was pretty fun. Anyway,
Yeah. Did they open the gates for you then, Mark? Basically, or no?
they did. It was pretty remarkable. I felt like they opened the airport just for me. I was the first one in
Yeah.
line for baggage check on a Tuesday.
Oh, that's nice.
Huh.
Anyway, should we talk about docs?
Yeah, tell me about docs. Do you like writing docs, Mark?
No.
You've got a book out, you big idiot.
Yeah,
You've got- right. Sorry, I've got to be nice to Mark on this. I was been told. I should
writing
say,
books and liking writing books are two very different things. They're not the same.
True.
right?
You
But
know?
yes,
I've written 4 of them. I hated the process of every single one of them.
But
Yeah,
in
no one
fairness,
likes-
accidentally wrote this book. It wasn't planned.
Oh, just it happened.
Incidental book. By the way, the
accidental
book we're talking about for all those who are listening is Go Fundamentals.
Mm.
Available now or all good. Just search for Go Fundamentals Gopher Guides and you will find it. Sorry. You can cut that out of the show. I had to do it.
Get that right out of there. Goodbye.
What's it about?
But yeah, I don't Go Fundamentals.
Well, this
Uh,
little
What's
gopher,
the title then?
he has
No,
no
it's
friends.
I serious question to the group. Does anybody like writing docs?
I
No,
like
didn't think so.
Well, yeah. I'll jump in and I'll go against the flow. I mean, I actually like writing docs, but not. I don't like writing the sort of the documentation for, say, since this is a Go podcast, I don't like writing the docs for my export identifiers, right? Like, even though
like the
they're
Go doc,
what
yeah.
help, right? Yeah, they're what help with generating the Go doc and all that stuff, and those things are useful, right? When you're looking at an API, you want to know what things do, right? But I well, none of that, I don't like them. I think I have a preference for sort of a README development, sort of a docking, right? Or documentation, or architecture documentation, or system design documentation. I much prefer those because I think that's where the creativity, right, comes in, right? With like
You're allowed
code
longer
level
form exposition too.
Right, exactly. You're not trying to be succinct, and you're not trying to, like, write a manual for the specific bits. Like, you're just describing what the thing does at that point, right? Because the thinking, the creativity, all that design work has already come, and ideally you have documented that. I prefer that part.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
I'm
you've got
with you.
reference
yeah,
material.
sorry.
Sorry, mate. Yeah, because you've got reference material that's what the Go docs are. So that's
Right.
useful, and it's like when you have docs generated by Swagger, and it's just you just get an enormous index, and you're just sort of on your own, and so it's not. There's no curated experience. There's nobody taking you through this and telling you a story about the docs. It's just here's just all the reference material. Good luck, and you never know what to do with it.
Two is I don't know if anybody else has the same problem, but I'm Johnny's boat. I hate writing them because what I hate writing about them is I always feel like writing is so obvious to what is happening in that function or method or identifier, because is good naming of my identifiers, right? And so that alone helps so much if you can really name something well. If you're keeping your methods and functions really short, like they're not doing a ton. Like I'm pretty much like, this function does exactly what its method name says it does. Like, what else do you want me to say?
Yeah.
It's a string function. It returns a string. I mean, string returns a string, a representation. Like, yeah, obviously. That's where I struggle with that short form kind of little bit of writing.
Yeah, it's that
Well-
thing. It's the pattern, isn't it? We do that. We do it because it's good, and then therefore we do it all the time, and sometimes it's silly. But I notice you don't in the linting tools or whatever the tool is. Go doc check. There's a tool that checks docs. It doesn't complain if you're implementing common interfaces, so it doesn't actually make you say string is a string representation. But there are other examples when it's not part of those kind of standard interfaces that where it will just say like, oh, you need to put a comment here, and the thing's just called something really like stop, and it's a thing that you've started. It's like stops this. It feels unnecessary.
And
but
starts it. It's like,
guess what? Just
and if there's a
starts
problem,
it.
it's gonna return an error. Like, what else do you want me to say?
Yeah.
Like that's.
Well,
think
I-
the system, there's really like two styles of docs, like Johnny was saying, right? There's I got to document my code, right? Which is go in and give all my exported symbols something to say. But then there's I have to write the README. I have to write the blog about what this does, right? And that's the stuff that I enjoy writing that. I think a lot of people enjoy writing that. But that's also by far the hardest part to write. Like that's a lot of work.
Mhm.
And there's two stages to documents that always frustrated me. There's the initial documentation, right? You write it, and then you come back 6 months later, right? And is that documentation up to date? No.
Mhm.
And you think to yourself, I'm going to update this, right? But you never do. And then people come to it like, oh, I tried your example, but it doesn't work. Well, because it's 6 months out of date.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or the example itself is broken because validated the code could compile in general. You forgot a thing somewhere, comma. Stupid that makes the whole thing not even. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
worse.
Inaccurate. It's unbelievable.
it's also worth sort of calling out there's some documentation. I've seen APIs that are well documented, right? Where they have good names and like Mark's talking about, it's like self-explanatory what the thing is and does. But to Corey's point, if you have a README that's showing usage documentation, right? You might have very sort of at the unit level, each function is indeed self-documented, but depending on the complexity of the library and what it is that it sets out to do, you're typically composing, right, various bits and pieces of the library or, whatever that thing is. So that's where the usage documentation, how should you be approaching this project? Because I've seen APIs that are well documented, Godoc everywhere, but then the README is very sparse. And I'm like, okay, well, where do I start? How do I actually use this, right? Like what's my starting point here, right? And that right there, I think is perhaps even like I would prefer that over like 100% documented, Godoc,
API.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I'd prefer like this is how you use this thing, right? And then I can infer what the particular function does if it's well named, right?
I completely agree. There's nothing worse than going to a project and the only is that the test pass, and here's a link to the Godoc to find out more. And it's like, well,
Right.
Like you said, well, that's great. There's all these. Now I'm looking at 56 types, all these functions, methods, constants, and all these different crazy things going on. It's like, well, where's my starting point? How do I get this thing to do a basic thing?
Yeah.
And then how do I do a less basic thing, and so on and so forth? Like, yeah, especially when you have large projects.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you go to kind of a utility library and maybe it's got a handful of types and functions or whatever, and they're pretty small. It's pretty easy to just look at the Godoc and say, okay, I know exactly what this is doing. It's not too crazy. But yeah, if you're trying to imagine if Docker was just like, hey, here's my README, just go look at the Godoc for Docker and figure it out for yourself. Or Kubernetes or some massive library. It was just like, here's Godoc, have fun.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
That's when it has the opposite effect, I think, where it's like, this is actually too overwhelming. Like there's too much stuff here. It feels like insurmountable, and that could put people off. People just build little versions of stuff, and there are libraries and tools out there, but they're very big and they're quite intimidating. So it's like that I think is a good reason to keep things simple and small where you can anyway. But I think it's a docs issue. It's like like you say, it's not. There isn't somebody saying, okay, first thing you're going to do, import this package, get this type, do this little thing. That's basically what you're trying to do here. That's the basics, and then from there we can take you on a journey. It's just kind of storytelling, isn't it?
It is. And I think that's why, as a whole, I think we'd all prefer to write those sorts of docs, right? Because we can tell a story, and we're all better at that than writing these weird, succinct little sentences, like a fraction of an idea that is a method. You know, like this small little thing where you can tell a story. You say, okay, hey, point A to point B, let's walk through how we're going to get there, and then we're going to use this library or tool, whatever it is, to get from point A to point B, and let's walk you through it. And that is much, I think, for the user. It's also much harder to do. It's very different. Well, it's harder in a very different boxes. How's about that?
And somehow we like to throw like newbies, like people who are, or at least new to a library, right, to say, hey, this is what I'd like you to do. Like, you want to contribute, write some usage docs, and then now like we're putting some like a task on their shoulders that is, like you just said, it is hard, right, to weave together a story, right, and they have to, so it's like we so often like elect those we'll put a like a good starter tag on these things on GitHub or something like that, and say, hey, yeah, write this doc, but we take for granted how hard it is to truly weave together a story that tells you exactly how to use something.
Oh, God,
I think it tells you. I think it tells you something about the mindset, really. If you're giving a junior person like, oh, cool, just to get started, you can just work on docs. That really tells you the attitude towards docs, that it is this sort of necessary evil. We just have to tick a box. We've just got to make sure we've got all the coverage or whatever it is. So it is kind of a bit of a red flag, maybe, if that's happening.
Well, developers, I mean, I can only speak for myself, would rather code than write docs. Right? I mean, we're a fickle bunch. We don't want to do anything we don't want to do. And if it's not coding, most of us don't want to do it. And that's where you get stuck there. And that's why it becomes this chore, junior engineer, because you don't want to do it. You'd rather be coding, right? Like, let the junior engineer write so you can write all the cool code. Of course, the junior experience they need in the code, but they're hopefully becoming better technical writers.
But I think a big part of it is like you said, it's that chore to documentation, right? And I think that's part of, what we're going to talk about today is, what if it wasn't a chore, right? I think that's a big part of it. What if it was actually easy to write these docs? Because I like to write the stories. I mean, I like to write the blogs, I like to write the presentations. But when it's a lot of work, you kind of dread that. When it's not a lot of work, then you don't dread it so much.
Yeah.
Well, is it that it's not rewarded?
It's tedious, right? It's tedious. I mean, think about let's take a really simple Hello World introduction, right? To go, I have to write the code, and then I have to take the code and I have to copy it and put it in my documentation. Then I have to run the code, and then I have to take the output of that code and put it in my documentation. And then if I make one change to my code, I have to update everything all over again, right? Like, it's incredibly tedious and mind-numbing. And as developers, we don't like to repeat ourselves, right? We don't like to repeat when we say things. We don't like to repeat when we code things. We certainly don't like to repeat when we document things, right? And so part of that process of documentation is so much repetitiveness over things that should be like, can't this document do it on its own? Like, why can't it do these simple things, right? So that I can write code and then I'm done. I don't have to put that in my story by hand. My story just generates all that.
Well, that sounds amazing.
And Mark Bates kind of took that to the next level.
I love when I hear my name mentioned in the podcast that I'm on. Thought I wasn't.
You weren't paying attention. That's why he said your name, I think.
Well, let's think about it this way. As Gopher Guides, we're a training company. A lot of people think what we do primarily is train. They would kind of be wrong in a way. What we primarily do is generate documentation, like oodles and oodles of documentation. It's all we do. And then we maintain documentation because every 6 months a Go release comes out and all of our code gets updated in certain areas. Like, some chapters get completely rewritten, but some just need a ton of refactoring. Something as simple as, IUtil gets deprecated, right? I have to search everywhere that IUtil was ever mentioned in any of our documentation and now put it in the right spot. So it's not just changing your code now, it's changing your documentation. But I shouldn't have to change my documentation. I should just have to change my code, right? And so we spend all our time writing docs. So when Gopher Guides first started, Mark went to task and wrote an initial tool that really helped creating documentation very quickly, especially technical documentation. And that just graduated over the years into this tool that we use today that almost writes documentation for you.
It is a little disturbing.
Spooky.
And I'm going to let Mark kind of take off from there and
Is
explain.
it GPT based? Mark?
You know,
I know, right?
in a certain way, like if we actually enabled
Hell,
this to be GPT based, or even just whatever the one GitHub has there, I think
Copilot.
Copilot. In fact, I think Mark used a lot of Copilot when we actually wrote some of our stuff.
No.
No.
We won't legally admit.
It's like what do you mean?
What are you talking about, Corey?
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Copilot.
We don't know who owns it yet.
To put I guess to kind of jump off what Corey was saying, the biggest problem with documentation is the upkeep.
Yeah.
Like when I talk about why I don't like writing documentation, it's because it's not just that initial chore, which I can, right? You can do that initial chore, you're in the moment, you're there. It's the maintenance of that chore.
Yeah.
As our APIs change, as Go changes, like there's a chore associated with that we must do every time we make those changes. And that's the chore of my mind when I'm writing documentation. And that's what makes me go, I don't want to write the docs. It's not the initial, it's the future, the years of maintenance that go into keeping that README up to date.
And I've seen projects. I've seen projects that will like they don't want to do the docs yet because the API is still in flux. But the thing is, like API, like the work is always in flux. When are we ever really finished? So it's a mistake to say, "Oh, I'm not going to do the docs for a while until things settle down." Like that's a tough thing to get right. So even that doesn't really help. And the maintenance cost is the biggest cost, of course.
That's because we don't include doc writing as part of the task. It's like it's like a bolt on, right? I think there are memes out there even, right? For example, if you take like tests, right? You have the people, so in order of the things we prefer as developers, right? We like to write the code that does the thing, right? Next, we don't love write the test, but we know that okay, if I need to get this thing merged in, I have to write tests. Okay, and it becomes this other thing. Maybe you might even have a different estimate for on your board that it's like, oh, okay, now I gotta write the test, right? And then least of all is the docs, right? So you go from code to test to docs, right? And then rather than looking at all these things as just one unit of work, we'd be like, okay, let's make them three separate things, and then let's do the thing I love first, and then the thing that's the most fun. And then from there, it's just downhill, right? We just don't look at it as just one thing.
And that's what you have the junior engineer
TDD.
for.
Yeah. I do TDD, so I actually do like that testing bit, but I'm splitting hairs because you're right. That is essentially the process. Imagine if you could have tests for your docs.
Well, that's kind of partly where we're coming from, what kind of Corey was kind of alluding to. So, we generate so much documentation, like that in content, like that's what we do. Like a few years ago, we wrote like articles for DigitalOcean in like 3 months. You can go online, there's an ebook of it on DigitalOcean, and it's like 600 pages. Booleans in great depth, like these sorts of articles, right?
Is that true? True?
That is true. Yeah,
it's a Boolean joke.
Oh. Yeah.
No, I want to read it though because I want to find out what there is to know about Booleans.
That was
Booleans?
good.
So much
Making those jokes. Anywho, and then of course things like this, right? Like this is nearly 600 pages of technical. And
the book.
The book. And Corey said, that we wrote this book by accident because we were working on a 12-week for that we were going to do. We did a 12-week fundamental course. It went really, really well. It was like a master style college level course. It was so. Then we had to go and we got so busy with the corporate and then writing the book, we unfortunately were never able to actually get back to that. But that class became this book accidentally, and it's all because of this tool that Corey was talking about.
Hmm.
That we help us fix these problems we have with all this documentation that we were just talking about, the maintenance, the upkeep, portability. You know, we write code, we write documentation, um, but there are many places where we need our documentation. So, we're writing all this content, we're doing all this heavy, deep technical writing. We're publishing it to the web, maybe as blog posts or in a slide format, pushing it to Canvas, which is like the world's leading learning management system, via a Rails API that they have, right? Or LaTeX. When we did the book, the publishing company, Addison Wesley, needed LaTeX. So we had to take our content and give it to them in LaTeX. So we have places we need to put it, databases and APIs and HTML and LaTeX. And the last thing I do was rewrite all of that same content for all those different places and have to spend a lot of time reworking that content, because every that if you keep splintering that content out to all these different places and it's not centralized, then that maintenance nightmare we were just talking about. Right. So if I want to update now a course in Canvas, that LMS system, I now have to go there and do all the updates there, updates to, LaTeX and the same, whatever it is, right? We need, as documentation writers, as technical writers, to disassociate what we write from the presentation layer and where it goes. And a lot of tools, those two, or they disconnect them in such an abstract way that it's like it's all via JSON and all these like configurations that you're now caught up in that. What we wanted to do and what we had to do is we wanted to work in our editors in Vim or VS Code, what have you. We wanted to work with local files. We wanted to be able to write in something simple and easy, like Markdown, right? We all write our READMEs in Markdown. It's a nice format for doing that, but it's limited. It doesn't allow us to do code samples, snippets from files, or run output and include it automatically, or inject GoDoc, directly into the documentation, or any of those sorts of things, or validate it, or allow us to pull it apart and do all these things. So what we did was we just built that system. We took Markdown and added the ability to put some custom HTML tags. And from there, we're able to parse it and execute the document and do all sorts of different things, kind of in wherever we want. We can execute this document and have all of the code samples, and we can put in there, okay, I want the GoDoc for OF, and it's going to go and it's going to run GoDoc and it's going to capture that output and it's going to stick it in for us.
I see.
If I say I want to run here, I want to ship code, and then I want to run this, I want to run go build or go run dot or whatever it is I want to run, and I expect that this code, because I'm showing something that panics, right? So I can even say I want to make sure that it exits with a 1 or a 2. Put these nice little simple HTML tags in there. We can execute the document and it's going to fill in all of that. And if there are problems, it's immediately telling us our code was wrong, the exit statuses were wrong, the image didn't exist they were looking for, the included file didn't exist. Like, there's all these different applications and kind of understanding we can get by compiling the Markdown document like this. And then we can take all those different elements and via APIs, post them to a data, put them into a database, write HTML, create LaTeX, whatever we want. But the really writing and keeping things very, very simple. Local files, Markdown, and HTML. Like, there are tools, every editor for Markdown, HTML. We all know Markdown and HTML, right? There's no learning curve. It's just practically, like I said, practically very little learning curve to do it. And we just work in our editors and everything just kind of falls into place. And it's just such a nice way to work, to know that every time we make a change to that code, that we're being told whether our documentation is valid or not.
And I think one of the other
That's the big thing for us.
one of the other key concepts too that really came into this tool that I think works really well is that it allows us to develop documentation in the same way that we code. Now, what does that mean? Well, if I've got a Kubernetes project, right? When I open that up, I don't look at every single file at the same time and try to write code, right? I open up one package or one file and I work with that subsection. And then I make sure that subsection is tested, runs, all that kind of good stuff, right? And so with the way that includes work in basically partial, if you want to call them that, with our tool, is if I'm writing a section on, the file system, right? I will literally create one folder that just talks about one type. And I'll write 2 or 3 paragraphs about that. I'll put 1 or 2 code samples in that. I'll make sure that they know like what the outcome is, whether they pass or fail. And that's that one section. And I can see it all on my screen and I'm just looking at that one piece. I'm seeing the output. I'm seeing the rendered documentation for just literally, a couple paragraphs and a little few code snippets. And then I can back out of there and say, okay, now I've inserted that into the larger chapter. And how did that flow? And now I can back out of that and see the larger chapter again and see how that flows, just like you do code, right? It also means that when that type of system changes, maybe they make an update in the language when they go ahead and make a new release, I can just go into that little piece of code and that one little 2 or 3 paragraphs and make just my changes right there and refactor just that little bit of documentation and code, just like you would Go code. Like you wouldn't edit 25 files at once. You would edit 2 or 3 files at once. And so this really gives you that very hyper-focused ability to concentrate on really specific topics and really be able to see them at a glance. And then you can pull back and kind of then see, how does this go into my documentation now and how does it flow? And it really lets you write really, really solid documentation and really, really comprehensive documentation when you approach it that way. And it feels like you're writing code. Like that's another thing too. Like now I don't feel like I'm writing documentation. Now I feel like I'm writing code. And as a developer, I want to write code. And if it feels like I'm writing code, I'm having fun again.
Yeah, I mean, we've got each markdown file because everything's relative. The tool handles when you include links to make sure that the relativity is proper, all the pathing is there. So, like I said, you can work on a partial, and all the links and all is going to be there and proper in the files. But then when you include it into something bigger, all of those relative links are going to be rewritten to be properly. So you're never worrying about that. You're never dealing with, kind of, oh, it works here, and then I include it here, and now these links don't work, and these are broken, and stuff like that. But inside of those files, we're really working with Go files and other, source, including them into the markdown with an HTML code tag, and saying here, include this source file or include this snippet within the comments within our code to do snippets, to mark off snippets in our Go file so we can extract those right away and just shove them.
Well, that's better than using static lines, of course, for maintainability.
It's much better than
using
static
line numbers. When things change around, then all your docs are out of kilter again. What's the tool called,
that
by
for
the way?
a while. It's called Hype.
Hype. It's very modest.
The Hype.
Oh yeah, don't believe it.
Is it out there? Is it open source?
It is not. No.
That's part of the secret sauce.
It is. If anybody's looking to buy us for that secret sauce, you just let me know. GitHub, I'm looking at you. Imagine if GitHub had this sort of technology built into its READMEs.
The fact that you never write your READMEs again, they're all generated. So like anytime you update any code anywhere in your code base, if your README reference that code, as soon as you check it in, that README recompiles because it's generated. Right?
Mm-hmm. And you have the outputs, you have those code examples, everything would be live right there in your README.
Part of it is, I've been developing for 20 plus years, and there's people who've been developing 40 plus years. The fact that our documentation tooling is this out of date yet is baffling. It's baffling, right? I mean, our doc tooling is truly like banging rocks together yet. And that's where
not ours. Not
ours.
Gopher Guides tooling is amazing.
And again, one of our competitive advantages, I think, early on was that we could update our material so fast that, within 2 to 3 months of new releases in Go coming out, our material was already updated. And the reuse, right? So when I go in and I update, my interface chapter and start to add generics in it and start to say, hey, instead of using an empty interface, now we use the word keyword any. I'm editing code files that probably show up in 2,000 courses I've taught. And so when these people come back and see their courses that they've taken over the years, I only edited one file. That was it. And everybody got the updates because it's code, right? Just like when I update a package and it's included, that's what we do. That's how our docs are. Like they're just included. I don't write, about, interfaces 1,000 times. I write about them one time. Then everybody gets that file.
And the nice thing too is like Markdown with HTML. I mean, it's super easy to diff and comment on in a PR and all this sort of stuff, right? There's just like, and then you get all the code, which you can then comment on just like you would too. So you can pull it down. You can to make sure your partner's not losing their mind. You can change the example. You can do all these nice things, and you're just working with regular code in a brand. And then you end up with a book when you compile it, or you end up with a website, or you're pushed to an API.
Yeah, it's funny that concept of compiling your docs. I feel like that really just kind of feel nice, and also because I like TDD. I have before done document-driven development in that I wrote the README first to kind of explain, oh, this is how I imagine it's going to be, and that really then influenced the tests, which influenced the code and influenced the whole design. Could you do that with that? Could you just do docs first too, and actually have them build and fail? Like they're kind of like tests and docs at the same time.
Absolutely. In fact, it's interesting that this tooling has changed the way I write documentation, because I think about that. We write a lot of blogs, but anytime you write a blog, traditionally you kind of write that blog and then you go back and you read the blog and you realize you're missing these pieces, right? Because you write a bunch of stuff, then you go back and you don't really read the blog until you're done, right? And so you kind of write and you would never do that with code. You would never write pages and pages and pages of code and then run a test, right? You would be running your test as you're writing your code, and very much like TDD would be, right? And so with this documentation tool, because you've always got a window up that's showing you the documentation as you're writing it, you're writing documentation, and in real time, you're watching it flow. Like you're literally watching it render real time. I read a code sample, I include it real time, it's there. And so you're doing that. And so what you're catching right away is you're catching, oh, you know what? I jumped a step. Like I realized I already jumped a step. So I got to go back and backfill this step real quick and show, hey, I'm talking about this thing, but I forgot to tell you about it. And so by the time you're done with this blog, when you go back to reread it, it's mostly done because you've been testing it as you've been writing it. And that's the thing about documentation that you don't have with other tooling. You kind of have to write this whole story, and you go back for 10 different revisions, and then you give it to your buddy and they have another 10 revisions. And it's really kind of a grueling process. It's not fun. But if you have real-time feedback and you're watching it literally render as you go, it just completely changes your mindset on it, because you can see it, you can absorb it and consume it immediately.
So it must be much better quality just by that nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just start getting into the flow after a while. It's disturbing how easy it becomes to write in this nature. Our editor hates us, told us never not to say this, but the truth is, when the original manuscript of this book, 1,000 pages, and they made us trim it down. It was either that or we put out 2 books, and we opted for 1. But it was just that easy to write the content, because we could include, read the book like GoDoc. We include the GoDoc right there for methods and types and stuff that we think are important for you to see. So you don't read the GoDoc somewhere else; it's included right in there. And when you start doing stuff like that, it's easy to add bulk, but it's to your page, those things are useful to people, and they're right there. And for us, it's one line of HTML that's just go doc equals F. Here you go, boom, there you go. It's all put in there and everything.
And what's critical about that too is when Go 1.22 comes out, all we do is recompile the docs. Whatever doesn't compile means something either changed, or if the Go docs got updated, our documentation got updated. Like even the things we depend on, right? Like GoDoc isn't part of our, like we didn't write GoDoc, right? It's just a tool that we use from our tooling. If the output of the Go build command changes or the Go run command changes, our documentation is 100% up to date automatically just by recompiling. We don't have to touch a line of code, a line of documentation. Absolutely nothing has to change, and we're 100% up to date. So I'm really waiting for when they come back and say, "Hey, we want you to, do your first revision of your book and update it with 1.25." Like, okay, yeah, press the button. Here you go. We're done. It's over.
Add in the 3 extra paragraphs once new and call it a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because it's just so easy. I use it for all my writing, to be honest. I do my papers I'm doing a master's degree, and I write all my papers this way.
What are you doing your master's degree in?
Oh, and sound and audio production.
The Sound of Music?
Yeah, it's music. The exact title of the degree, but yeah, I use it to write all my papers for that because it can be incredibly useful. I'm pulling in all sorts of weird information, and I found it to be incredibly useful and works really well, really for what I wanted it to do.
Well, I think that's
just for some. Sorry, guys. I was just going to say, just for some balance. So, like, if anyone did want to buy Gopher Guides, you would also have to get Mark. I just want to put that out there, just to sort of balance this out.
To be warned, be forewarned.
If you have to take Mark.
I think one of the key things that Mark kind of hit on there without really saying it is that we're talking about Go, right? But this tool isn't just Go. I mean, we in our presentations to people that wanted to kind of see this, we showed them like we could do PHP, we could do Ruby, we can do. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you can execute a command, you can run it and include it in the doc automatically. So there's things like we do like tree. Like I want to show you the directory structure. So there's a 1-line code that does the tree. Now, if I change my directory structure later on, all I do is regenerate my docs. I don't have to update the tree command. And these are subtle little things that you think, oh, well, that's a big deal. Like, and you might be listening to this podcast going, well, any junior developer could do that. You're right, they could, but I'm telling you, the amount of time saving it gives you is unbelievable when you're writing documentation.
Yeah, but so how can people action this then? Like, is this a tool that people can like?
We want to see it go to the public. We really do, but we're like any entrepreneurs. We're kind of stuck in the catch-22. So we have day jobs and we're incredibly busy with training, and that's a good problem to have, right? That's a good problem to have. We love the tool. We would love to develop this tool, but I've been in startups for 20 plus years. I've done the funding routes. I've done the bootstrapping routes. Maybe I'm just too old at this point, right? Like if somebody wants to come and fund us, I'll listen, right? But I'm not going to go out there. I'm not interested in trying to track down funding. I think unequivocally, this is a tool the world needs. This would change documentation as we know it. It really would. Anybody we've shown this to has blown their mind. They see the source that generates the code. They see how easy it is. Like, this is unbelievable. Why don't we have this? And it's really because we don't have the time.
Will you leave it to us in your wills?
Yes, absolutely.
Just in case it doesn't. Yeah,
I'll tell you. Yeah, no, yeah. If and when Gopher Guides ever goes away, absolutely, we'll leave it to you.
No, but
we have looked at different ways of kind of making it out there. One of the things that I did a proof of concept on, and I kind of joked about it earlier, was GitHub READMEs, and just having a GitHub action that would compile your hype mark down to a regular plain old mark on commit, right? So that way you would, it was kind of that kind of step. I mean, if GitHub had this sort of, didn't even need that intermediate step, right? It could just that live.
Well, instead of GitHub, instead of doing a README, right, you would do the .git/README, and that would be all your documents, and it would be all the includes, and it could point to your code in your repo, and literally when you check it in, it just gets updated. Like it literally recompiles to the full markdown, and then you literally see that diff on the README as part of the commit. You literally see like this is what's going to change in my README as a result.
What about doing it as a service?
We've talked about that. The service would be the easiest route, but again, it's time. Who has the time?
Because that would be cool.
I think
the action that did that.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we were. I think the bigger takeaway that apart from this is we've built this great tool that we love and we use and whatever, is that the tooling around documentation overall is just too painful, and people who write those who are expecting others to contribute to their projects from a documentation standpoint need to consider the docs of that interaction for junior developers, for new people, for existing people. Like, what is it like to write documentations for you? Do I have to do and like all this weird stuff, or can I just write some markdown and give it to you? Like, what is that process? Try to make it as easy and as simple for you and for everybody else, and try to come up with those ways that you can make this process of writing documentation. I'm not saying everybody has to go out and write their own this tooling or whatever, but I'm just kind of, these are things that we found were real big problems to us. 5-6 years working on tooling to help us solve these problems, because they're problems that everybody is having. You know, some of them can be easily solved with better practices and a little more time and care. Like Johnny, I think it was Johnny who was saying earlier, kind of pushing docs all the way to the very end. Let's bake some time in for them into the process. We were able to get testing baked into our process. That took years. I know I used to lie through my teeth to people about estimate add testing in there, because as soon as you would say to somebody, "Oh, I want to add testing in 2005, 2000,"
You don't need that.
I would go, "No, absolutely not.
You don't
Get
have
it out
time
the
for
door.
that."
We don't have time for 2 more days of testing. What are you, crazy?" So your teeth and just say, "Oh, it takes 5 days instead of 3. Now I got my 2 days for testing." Now at least people understand that. We've gotten, testing has become an integral part of what we do as engineers. We're also protesting the pro space testing, or protesting.
Would be a
We're
good
all for
alternative
the
name for your project, though.
There you go. We're all for the active testing, and management come along for the ride. We need to do the same thing with documentation too. Is I think what I'm
I
trying to
think
say.
one of the other things too, and we really didn't underscore it heavily, so I want to underscore it now, is technical accuracy, right? Like we're writing technical documentation. Well, there's nothing more important than the code sample being correct, that it runs. And so that's the other thing that this tool really does a good job of, is it makes sure that every single one of your code examples runs and exits with a 0, right? Like make sure everything's proper. Additionally, like Mark was saying earlier, there's plenty of times you want to show an example of where it doesn't work, it's going to fail. And you even want to show the output of it failing. Well, a lot of tools do a really good job of, okay, if it's successful, we put it in, but if it fails, your whole documentation chain just blows up, right? You can't run it. We actually want to see when failures happen. And so the tooling allows us to say, I expect success and it has to compile with success, or I expect failure and it has to compile with failure. And I even want the output of the failure to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Like, this is how it fails. And that allows us to write a lot of code very quickly and never have to, I mean, that's your testing part of it, right? So, when you're writing code, you write tests. Well, this tooling, basically, I'm telling you, here's the expected output. Here's the test output I want. And that is super critical to this tool chain when you're writing technical documentation. Now, this is not just Go. It can be done with Java or Rails or, Ruby or Python. It doesn't matter. It's not distinct.
Yeah, I think it's the UX of the docs is a really nice way of thinking about it. It's anytime, like, who's going to use this and what's their state of mind when they come to this? What's that journey you're going to take them on? I think that applied here makes a lot of sense. Well, I'll tell you what, you won't believe what time it is now. And if you check the doc, it does make it clear. It's time for your friend and mine, Unpopular Opinions. Unpopular opinions.
I actually think you should probably leave.
Unpopular opinion. Okay. Who has an unpopular opinion for us today?
I have 4.
You have 4 unpopular opinions.
I haven't been on the show in a while.
You've been keeping them in a bag of unpopular opinions.
I have.
Okay,
Maybe that's the unpopular opinion, is Mark shouldn't use all these unpopular opinions.
Yeah.
Can I share all 4 or just one?
Well, let's do one first, shall we? And then see how we go. Pick your best one. Pick your best one.
But there's so many. I've got 4. I'll start with the one that always irritates me, and that function is poorly designed.
Oh, interesting. Tell us more.
It should take argument. That's my unpopular opinion. I don't like os.args. Global variables, thank you.
Yeah. That's almost another one.
Yeah.
You
So
almost got
that's
two
my
out
first
there.
one.
No, but that's
Yeah,
a really
no,
interesting
but
one.
but that goes with it. That goes with the
Yes.
poor design.
Yeah.
Use global variables.
Yeah, I agree, and actually have a pattern where I always call out to a run function that takes in the environment bits like args,
Yeah.
standard in, standard out, even standard error, and then also can return an error. And then in the main, all the main is only ever 5 lines where it calls that, and then you handle the global error once, and there's no global state, and it makes it very easy to test as well because you can just call this run function like a normal function.
Yeah, I use a different pattern, which is like a commander interface, which interface is main, and it takes, it's a main method. It takes a context, present working directory, arguments, and returns an error. And I can pretty much do everything I want because I can put IO on the type that has that interface, and I just call out to that in another package. So I can as quick as I possibly can. But yeah, I think that, that's did a bit of drag. It would be so nice if we could just return an error instead of and we can control all that, but you could also control it and or return an error.
What about just returning an error though? What about the exit code? Because a big part of programs, as we've talked about already, is the exit code. And in C, like it'll be often as an int. You can just return, and you just return the exit code. It's very clear what's happening when you do that.
Yeah.
Would you accept that?
Yeah, I think I would. The way I would probably do it would be the default is, you get or something like that. If you return an error, maybe that error could also implement an interface that has a status code function on it, which is something I've also done in my my own patterns. I've used that interface before, to check against an error and then use that. Or if you really want to OS exit yourself, and you don't have to return anything, that would be the way I would design the main function.
What do you think of that, Johnny?
That's just me.
I do like to keep as much as possible out of the main function. Not always. It depends on what it is I'm trying to accomplish. If I'm writing a quick sort of executable just to get something done and get it out the way, I don't spend a ton of time. It depends on basically the longevity of the code, right? If it is something that and I'll say that I don't always write tests for, especially if I'm using libraries that are already tested. If all I'm doing is I have a main that's just using a library to do something, I don't see the value in removing code out of main to go put in something else, and then just so I can test that. All I'm doing is basically writing a project that integrates things that are already tested, right? So depending on basically what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, I may keep things out of main or just write the dozen lines or so that I need and call it a day.
Oh yeah, when we're all hacking scripts, that's a different argument. That's a different story altogether.
I think that's where the design came from. The idea is if you want to write a quick script, it is easier to do that just having global state. And if you don't have anything else complicated going on, then it's sort of okay because you're not going to be puddling.
Yeah, but actually, I don't think that's actually a valid argument for the design. To be perfectly honest, I think that actually goes against it. Because if you really want easy, you wouldn't it's an easy way to write a quick script. You'd let them return an error and give you arguments. You wouldn't have to reach out for global variables. You wouldn't have to handle exiting on your own.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, I agree with you. Like I'm in. I always. So we could do this. Like it would be possible. Like we've got obviously the backwards compatibility. So you'd always support the func main, but you could probably, as a special case, have a new main that was different in some way. Like it doesn't. It's not the end of the world, is it? It's possible.
Yeah, I don't think that soon.
No, but it's possible.
I just being realistic, I can't see that as a thing and go. I mean, because now you're kind of getting into almost Java-like syntax where you have different versions of the exact same function.
Overloading.
Yeah, but
so you've got a main that takes nothing and returns nothing. Then you have a main that takes args and returns an
compiler error. That would be an error if you did that.
Oh, it would. It's just kind of weird
today. Yeah.
No, I mean like in the design.
I don't like main. It makes layers on us as trainers, because as trainers, we show code snippets day after day of everything in main, and then we get all done. Oh, by the way, never use main.
No,
Never,
Sure.
don't use main. Yeah, never use main.
Sure.
Like, out of main as fast as you possibly can. Like, do not stay in main. But we just spent 5 days showing you everything in main.
Yeah.
Is saying I like the state of Maine. They have really tasty lobster, and we're not talking about you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Should make that clear.
I just want to make that very clear because I enjoy going to Maine for lobster. So
You'll get letters, won't you?
anyway.
If we're not. Yeah.
I will. I don't hate the state of Maine. I hate
Funky Maine. Mark, he called us Funky Maine. I don't know how they talk there. Probably like that.
No, they don't. They don't talk like that. They talk like Stephen King novels. There's a lot of
really?
you can't get there from here.
Oh.
You know, and that
that's-
there road nearly killed a man. You got to watch out there for your son there, Jason. Yeah,
I like these people. Just based on that.
Yeah, very down home.
Yeah.
Cemetery, get a good understanding of that.
Oh.
Okay.
So anyway, that was one of my.
Pretty good one. Corey, have you brought an unpopular opinion today?
I do, and as a trainer, it's a kind of a harsh one.
Oh.
I don't think Go is an easy language to learn as a programming language,
Really?
and here's why.
Mm.
When you think about Go, I mean, one of the big things that kind of slaps you in the face with is it doesn't have inheritance, right? Which is a good thing, right? As Go developers, we know it's a good thing. But when you try to teach people Go, and their entire life as a programmer revolves around inheritance, not only do you have to teach them about writing code that doesn't use inheritance, like they have to learn a whole new way of even like looking at examples and samples. You know, everybody's got the shape example with inheritance or the animal example with inheritance, right? And so they understand, okay, like, oh, how do we do that in Ruby? And how do we do that in C++? And they, you know, it all kind of has that same story to it. Well, Go invents brand new stories to tell brand new tales because we don't have the same tooling. And so not only now are you trying to teach new idioms for code, you're also trying to tell new stories that they've never heard, right? They have to learn the story as well. And I think that's what makes Go harder to learn. And it's deceiving because you can memorize the language in a day, right? Like you literally, like if you had to take a test and say you need to know every single symbol that comes in the Go runtime by tomorrow, everybody could probably do that. 130 words roughly, right? You could do that. So in a day, you could literally memorize the language, but you don't know the language. You're so far from being an actual credible Go developer. It's not even fun.
Yeah, that is a very good point.
Coming, you know, we've seen this as trainers, and Johnny, I'm sure you've seen this too, and the same thing. When people are brand new coding in general, they can get Go a little bit faster, I think, because they're not pulling those teaching a group of Java developers or .NET developers or Ruby developers, even to some extent. All these tons of preconceived notions around statically typed compiled languages, how they work, how things get done, what those patterns use. I think people do get really caught up on the way Go does things, which, you know, it is a little different. You know, so it can be difficult, I think, if you're coming from another language.
There's been times in class too where someone asks, well, why don't you do this? And I'll literally just finally say, because we just don't Go. Like we just don't. I can't even tell you why. We just don't. You know, or the amount of times people say, what happens if you do this? I'm like, I have no idea. And they're kind of like, well, wait, you're training Go. How do you not know what happens if you do this? I'm like, because you would never do that in Go. Like it would never even occur to you to do that in Go. But let's do it. Let's run it. And sometimes you're shocked that it actually works. You're like, I can't believe it works in Go. And then other times, like, yeah, compile time error, exactly what I expect, right? But that's where it goes just so different that it's in. So when then like for training, like we do these boot camp style trainings, right? So in 5 days, you're trying to impart, 6 months of knowledge onto these students, right? And it's complete brain overload every single time. And the only saving grace you have is the fact that, you've shown them everything and now they can come back and reference it later, right? Because we spend a day and a half on concurrency. Concurrency should be 2 weeks, right? But you're going to get a day and a half, right? You're going to get 6 hours. That's what you're going to get. But good luck, right? We got you. And so it's great, and concurrency is fine when you're doing weight group, right? Hey, this is easy. Oh, now I'm going to introduce channels to you. And now I'm going to show you the SLA pattern where I'm going to actually time out and make sure that if I exceed a certain amount of time that I return early, And oh, hey, there's this thing called a blocked go routine now you have to look out for, and here's what happens there. And by the time you get to that point, people are like, "What are you talking about?" Like concurrency was so simple, and now I have no idea what I'm doing. And so it
as soon as you bring channels into the mix, concurrency gets
Yeah.
Well, and I show an example where I retrieve 100 websites concurrently, and I use the sync.wait group to do it. And I literally take an example that just is in a for loop and calls out 100 times, and in 5 lines of code, I can make that work with a sync.wait group concurrently, right? 5 lines of code. Now to get that same code to work with channels, literally the code is 4 times as long and doesn't even look the same anymore. Now it's production ready this time, right? Because now I can handle things like timeouts and send the errors back in the right spot and all that kind of good stuff, right? I can manage, I don't want to have 100 connections at a time. I can manage, I want 20 connections. So now I got connection pooling built in. You got all this stuff going, right? And it's totally production ready, and it's 4 times the size. Whereas the sync.wait group was 5 lines of code I had to change, right? But I would never ship that to production.
Yeah, so that's, Okay, well, yeah, good one. Pretty good, that. Interesting. I mean, I agree, like, in fact, I do ship weight group stuff to production, like, if I can get away with it, because it's so much simpler. Yeah. Yeah, and also
I use Air Group mostly, but yeah.
Use what? Error group.
Yeah.
Error groups.
That still gets me. See, and I can't get behind it because it never made it as a real function, right?
Yeah.
It never made it to the standard library. So for me, I'm like, nope, it never made the grade. I can't use it. It stayed experimental forever.
It works. It's nice.
It's a batch failure. Only.
What is it? Tell us what it is.
Pretty much, most of the time, it does pretty much exactly what I want. Just
tell us what
I
it is.
usually just care about getting. What was that?
Yeah. So what Air Group versus Wait Group is that you can get the error back. So if you launch 100 Go routine, it'll wait for all 100 to exit, but whatever one returns an error first, it reports it as the error. So if you just need to know that anything in there failed, you can basically abort your batch, which is kind of that concept. But if 25 errors occurred, you're only getting the first one back. Right. Most of the time, I need to know all the errors, right? I need to know everything that happened to report that. Yeah. But there is a set of use cases where you're doing batch programming, where you're going to kind of roll the whole batch back, and any error says roll it back, then that's where it works.
We do have multi-error now in Go 120, and if you want to learn more about that, I suggest you listen to the episode with Carl Johnson and Johnny and I. It's a great one, and it talks about that new multi-error that's coming in Go 120.
It's already here.
It's here. That was like a Stephen King. That was a Stephen King line from Maine again.
I know it's yet one more thing I have to go update my documentation for.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Mark. I think we've got time for another one of your unpopular opinions. I feel like you've done 3 now. I'm counting.
Imports for side effects.
Oh. Bad.
Awful idea.
This is.
I want to slap whoever on the wrist thought that was a very good idea to use in the standard library, and it's used.
I don't think it's that popular.
So, just for people who don't know, this is where, because we have the init function that you can run and just runs like.
Which is also bad, but go on.
When the program just starts, yeah. Good for like some cases. Again, it's like easily abused, one of those. So just by importing a package, you actually then that init code will run, and it's kind of hidden, and it can do things. It can like you can change the default HTTP client, for example, and things like this. And I've seen code. Yeah, it's a surprise every time, isn't it?
The one that everybody kind of runs into is importing database drivers to register with the sync pack with the. We all do that. We put the little underscore at the very, to keep the package imported, even though we're not directly using it, because all it's running in a init function, which calls back to the SQL package and registers itself. And that's just such a. And then if you try to you have no registration either. If the registration fails for any reason, it panics.
Yeah, it has to, right? Well.
Yeah, because you've got this. For registering code, where what it should be is if you're gonna make me register at the package level, function or method, to call that would return an error if there's a problem with the registration, right?
Right. So you'd just rather have an explicit call, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
and
of
it could
course.
be idempotent too. Like that's the other thing too. Like because whenever I teach that topic, I teach the side effect, and I show them the only reason you have side effect is you have an init. Neither of one you should ever do. Like avoid it at all cost because it's magical, and we're not in a magical language anymore. But then it really is one of those things where I'm just like, why didn't they just make an idempotent call, right? Like the image package is a great example, right? I write a piece of code that compiles, it runs just fine, but when it goes to actually decode a PNG file, it fails. Why? Because I didn't import the image PNG package. Literally, I make the code pass by adding a side effect import. That's the only thing I do to the entire code, and that now it passes and it works, which is so wrong. Like that should not make my code work.
I have a
That's a
feeling
terrible
if
pattern.
I think the people whoever came up with that would probably agree now. Like I don't know that they would.
I
Like
hope.
sometimes things are just in the standard library. You know, it was written at the time really before these things were established. It's kind of amazing to see.
As a
this
as a
change, but-
trainer, things we fight against constantly. I'm constantly telling people not to do what's doing the standard library is doing in their face all the time.
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting here saying, don't do this very pattern, yet we can name numerous examples in the standard library where this is happening. And this is
Yeah.
like pattern encouraged by the standard library.
The good part about being the trainer, though, is that when people get really upset about it, the answer is, well, listen, I didn't write it. Like, I didn't write the
That's
language.
what
I didn't write it. I'm like, why do they do this? I didn't write it, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't.
I don't know what they were thinking.
Hopefully, I understand maybe why it was written that way when it was written, but even then, it still would have felt wrong because there's
the
this
magical
level
part of a
of
nit.
magic. Yeah.
That should have been the first red flag that went up when they put the init in. Should have been a major red flag. Like, wait a minute, this all of a sudden feels magical. Nothing else in Go is magical. Not a single thing, but this little init thing is magical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was one of mine.
Magical.
One of
yeah,
my
the
unpopular
magical
opinions
K.
was I would make you always have to have both arguments
I would too. I would
and use an
force it.
underscore. Just preferring explicit
Yeah.
and verbose over anything magic. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like-
that's very Go.
Like, why, for example, is it? Here's another unpopular opinion. This wasn't even on my list. Why can we do type assertion checking for the magic? Okay.
Hmm.
Well, it's if you
Like,
know.
why,
It's if
like-
you know it's going to be that.
You
yeah, but
know
if-
it today.
Then
You know
why
it
are you
today.
taking an
Now
interface?
I feel like I'm preaching to my students. Like, no, because you only know it today. Tomorrow, when somebody changes your code, they break it, and it panics in
Yeah.
production, and somebody hunts you down at 2 o'clock in the morning.
And if
Because
you're
why is your
if
code
you-
broken?
yeah, and if you're expecting a bytes buffer,
Right,
don't take an interface and then
Interface.
do a hard cat type assertion against. Like, there's no reason why you should be in that middle ground of I don't need to check the okay.
You might find generics helps with that a little bit because I think sometimes it's where they support multiple things, but again, it's quite magic. So you can
Yeah.
have strongly typed alternative methods instead, which I'd probably
Now you're touching on my unpopular opinion.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
Johnny,
go
let's
for
do
it.
it, shall we? Dun, 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 bam.
I think we put generics in Go to shut the critics up, not because we really needed it.
I agree.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've
100%.
used them. I use them for a few things, but I'm not like my code hasn't changed radically because of it.
Hmm.
Maps.
Like
Maps are
anything-
like the number one place I use it. I think.
There were some nice things it did, right? Like maps, like slices. I can do like the slices.keys, slices.values. Like that was kind of nice. But they could have done that without introducing generics. They could have just done the syntactic sugar in the runtime or the compiler, like whatever it was going to be, and done those things without introducing generics, because generics are going to ruin the language. You give it another 2-3 years, like you're going to see the worst code ever. And the fact
I
that we
don't
didn't
know-
have generics, it forced you to get it right. It really did. Again, there's a place for generics. Like there is.
I don't know. I don't know if they're gonna ruin the language because as they are right now, and so limited
So,
in use.
so I always tell people, Go doesn't have generics. They have generic function and method signatures. There's a big difference,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right.
And
Very,
so
very,
I think
very
people when we say generic for other languages, that means something radically different than what it means for Go. We just have generic signatures in Go, and I think
Right.
that
Yeah.
A is a good thing, right? Like that, like true generics would have been a disaster. So that's kind of good.
Parametric polymorphism.
Ooh,
Mouthful.
that sounds like fun.
That sounds like a Harry Potter spell.
I feel like
I
we're
have to go and get a CS degree, I think. It does sound like a
No.
Harry Potter spell.
our unpopular opinions are too unpopular.
Well, we'll
So there
test
we go.
these on social media. We'll find out. I think some of these, you might be surprised. Well, we're often surprised actually. It's quite hard to, because normally the case. What we should do is have a devil's advocate. So you'd have somebody makes the case, and then someone's like, "Yeah, I disagree with that." I don't know. Yeah, okay, I'll be the devil's advocate for yours, Johnny. Is that why they did it? Like, do you think
It's not the only reason. I don't think it's the only reason, but prior to the critics and everybody saying, "Oh, Go is for such a modern language, it doesn't it lacks modern features such as blah blah blah," right? I mean, when Go came out, I never heard anybody in the Go team or even the co-creators, like folks like Rob Pike and whatnot, talking about that the language is not complete because we're missing generics or anything like some things of that nature. It's that only came about really like from like I heard about the missing feature from the critics. When they became popular, popular blog posts of YouTube videos and people are like, well, yeah, why doesn't Go have generics? Like, and it kind of became, and I was like, okay, I've been writing production Go code for years. And it's not something I'm like, oh, you know what would be really good here? Generics. And because I can't like F this language, right? I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's just, to me, it feels so much like we're trying to appease people.
Okay. So in that case,
I'm with you. I felt the same way. I had no idea what generics even were because I'd never worked in a language with generics before.
Yeah, but you used Ruby, mate, which is basically the whole thing's just
meta programming, aka generics.
But Johnny, if that were true, that this was to silence critics and a sort of PR exercise, is that worth doing? If people were turned off because they just thought, oh, it's not good enough, even if they don't need a particular have a particular use case for it, is it worth doing things like that to satisfy the community? Like, devil's advocate.
Well, don't get me wrong, the generics has its uses, or rather, let me for the sake of this conversation, I will start calling it generics and start referring to it as parametric, polymorphism, right?
Okay,
that is very useful, right? I've come across situations where I have some boilerplate code, mind you, new code that I'm writing. I never go back and refactor non-generic code to be generic. For me, that's a no-no. If I'm writing new code and I'm finding, okay, there's a lot of boilerplate, especially if I have to put create, like, take for example, like if I'm writing multiple sum functions or something, I need a sum float and a sum int and a sum whatever, and I'm like, you know what, the body of this function is the same thing with all of these functions, right? Like things that I would normally take care of with a Go generate or something like that, right? Now I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I can probably just refactor this into just one thing, take in a type constraint and just call it a day, right? Like that those use cases, great. I can definitely see the usefulness of that. But anything beyond that, honestly, like I'm like, was it really that necessary? In my view, it was useful. I think it needed to be there as a modern language. We needed to have something of that nature, but I don't think it really truly revolutionized the language as much as people thought it would.
I agree. I have like a synchronized map type I use. And with that, I can set the key and value with generics, and that's really nice. Like that to me is like one use. It's been incredibly helpful. I have this nice synchronized map that I can use the exact types I want for, and then it's basically after that it becomes map reduce functions. Is essentially what's all that's left. Because I mean, even what Johnny was just describing was essentially a map reduce when you're talking about summing.
But data structures and things like that, like I can see a use in that if you have the same kind of thing, but in with different flavors. But yeah, again, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I haven't used it a lot. We want to do an episode, and this is a shout out if anyone's got any good examples of places where you've used generics and you thought, yes, this is right. I'd love to do a kind of generics in the wild episode of Go Time and look
Look your
at some
mind.
good
That was
uses.
it. It's 30 seconds of the episode.
Yeah, but you did it in
I
the
have one
unpopular
place
opinion
where I
section.
found them really useful.
I would caveat that request though. I would say beyond like just I don't want to see just map reduce or slices of maps. Right?
Mhm.
Outside of
Mhm.
those three scenarios, right? That's where I want to see because I'm in complete disbelief that it's
Yeah.
useful outside of those scenarios.
I've got one.
Yeah.
JSON marshalling and unmarshalling. Like you can just have a
So
method.
yeah, when it comes to like
Strong types.
Mhm.
ORM type stuff, like I can see that, like database, like anytime you're marshaling anything, right? Like I can see that.
Yeah.
If we do bring someone on the show for that episode, I think we need to bring. I think perhaps you and I, Matt, would be balanced in our view of it. At the very, I'm not gonna speak for you. I will take a very balanced view of it. But we should definitely bring someone who's pro generics and hopefully bring examples of how it has improved their lives,
Yeah.
considerably. And then we should bring somebody who's anti, right, who sees no value, right, and ideally, we should bring people who had gripes with Go for missing generics, and now bring them on the show and talk about, okay, now that the language has those features, have you actually used them, right? Like, how has your life improved? Did you get what you wanted, right? I want to hear from those people because they were very, very loud. Like, come be loud on the show. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, it's a bit scary the way you pitched it, but I think yes, I think definitely. And if that's you, please reach out. We're on we're Go Time FM on Twitter. We're in the Gophers Slack and the Go Time channel, Go Time FM.
And you can also find Go Time by searching for Lentils by Gopher Guides on Google and
Shameless plug.
Amazon.com.
Shameless.
We're not doing shameless plugs right now? I thought we were. Sorry.
That's another section we should start. And you should have its own little theme tune. Yeah, like ding 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 boom, something like that, like bouncy and yeah, it'd be nice. The book looks good though. Where can people get it? Is it available now?
It is available now at all stores near you, so no bookstores near you because they don't exist anymore. But if you can find a big bookstore, you might find a copy there because they do have them. Or you can just go to Amazon or all that good stuff. Just search for Go Fundamentals by Gopher Guides.
Yeah,
they make
nice
presents, Hanukkah presents, birthdays, divorces. Really,
what?
Any kind of party,
any occasion,
to any sort of special occasion. Really, Stepfather's Day, Arbor Day, huge. People love getting a big paper book on Arbor Day to celebrate the trees.
Yes.
Never heard of that one.
Exactly. Why not celebrate Arbor Day with a paperback copy of a 600-page book, folks?
Have some dead tree with your live ones.
Exactly. Nothing says be green this Arbor Day.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Cory LaNou, Mark Bates from Gopher Guides,
Thank
and
you.
Johnny Borsico. My name is Matt Ryer. Say it. Why not? Love you. See you next time on Go Time, shall we? Okay, bye. There we go. We did it. We're still live. I did have to say that because Mark Bates is on here and sometimes forgets.
Oi.
And says terrible
is true,
things.
And I do terrible things.
Keep your local audios. You can stop them now if you want. Do keep them You don't have to send them anywhere. It's just if this system fails, then we'll ask for them. So just keep them for a
Hopefully it
few.
doesn't, because my audio actually had a dialogue waiting for me to say something to it.
Ah,
Oh,
Had a what in it?
It had a pop-up dialogue saying like where to say everything.
confirm. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like,
Do you
"Hey,
want to do
really
this?
do this?"
yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, can you see
Well, that'll
your in
do
the
it.
top right hand corner? It says uploading 99%, or there's a percentage.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so when we stop, we wait for that to go to 100, and then you should be good. I feel like it'll be okay.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks everyone, and thanks for watching
Thank
live.
you.
See you next.